The rifle cracked like thunder tearing through heaven. For a moment the savanna held its breath. The sky burned red as if bleeding from the sound. Then came another noise, low, trembling and human in its grief. Have you ever heard an animal cry like a person? Would you still call it an animal if you did? David Njoroge was already running. He didn't wait for backup or orders. The footprints of men with guns were still fresh in the dirt, pressed deep by greed and fear. He followed the trail, through crushed grass and broken silence until he saw her, an elephant mother lying in the dust, her breath shallow, her tusks shattered like ivory tears. Beside her stood a calf, trembling, trying to lift her with a trunk too small for such a task. David dropped to his knees. The smell of metal filled his lungs. The calf's eyes locked onto his, wild, glassy, questioning. He saw something there that stripped every layer of distance between species, terror, confusion, and a plea that words could never hold. He reached out slow and steady until his hand touched the warm skin of the young elephant. "Easy," he whispered. His voice broke like a branch. "You're safe now. I've got you." But the lie hung heavy between them. The mother wouldn't rise again. When she exhaled her last, the sound left an emptiness that nothing could fill. The world seemed to shrink until only the man and the orphan remained, bound by loss neither could understand. David pressed his hand against his chest, a silent vow he didn't dare speak aloud. "I will not let them take you too." He worked in silence, cutting the wire snare from the calf's leg until it snapped free. The wound bled, but the elephant didn't run. It looked at him with something ancient in its eyes, trust born from pain. That was the day a promise was made, and though neither of them knew it, that promise would return 10 years later, carried by the wind and the weight of memory. Nights in Tsavo carried a stillness that could swallow a man's thoughts. David sat beside the small elephant, now bandaged and trembling in a wooden pen under the acacia trees. A lantern flickered between them, painting soft gold across grey skin. The calf had stopped crying hours ago. Its eyes followed every movement, cautious but curious. David spoke quietly, reading from a worn field journal, not because the elephant understood, but because silence felt heavier than words. Days passed, and the rhythm of care began to settle. He brought water at dawn, cleaned the wound, changed the bandages. The calf started to respond, to reach out with its trunk, to nudge his shoulder as if to say, "I remember you now." One morning, as the first sun brushed the plains, the calf lifted its trunk toward him for the first time, a gesture of peace, a beginning. David smiled. "You need a name," he whispered. Amara. It meant eternal in his grandmother's tongue. He didn't know how true that name would become. Months passed, the seasons shifted, and so did Amara. The wound on his ankle turned to a scar, and the fear in his eyes became a calm David had never seen before. They walked together through the grasslands, the ranger always a step behind, letting Amara lead. The calf learned to trust the rhythm of footsteps beside his own, the rhythm of safety. In the afternoons, David would sit beneath the old acacia and watch the horizon. Amara would rest nearby, his trunk swaying lazily in the warm air. The silence between them was no longer heavy. It was peace, but David knew what peace in the wild really meant, a pause before the next storm, and storms never stay away for long. The day came when the pen's gates stood open. Amara was strong now, his muscles thick, his eyes bright with something wild that had returned. David stood beside the open path. The savanna glowed with morning light. "Go on," he said softly. "This was never meant to be a cage." For a moment the elephant hesitated, then stepped forward, one slow stride after another, into the endless horizon. Dust rose behind him, like memory taking shape. Halfway across the clearing, Amara turned back. Their eyes met one last time. David pressed his hand against his chest. Amara lifted his trunk. The wind moved between them like a whispered goodbye. And then he was gone. Time passed like wind carving stone. 10 rainy seasons came and went, washing away tracks, faces, and voices, but not the memory. David stayed in Tsavo, older now, quieter. The poachers were fewer, the land more scarred. Some days he wondered if his years of service mattered. Other days he thought of Amara. One afternoon, while patrolling near a dried riverbed, he saw something familiar. A massive footprint pressed deep into the soil. The shape, the depth, the curve of the heel. He knew it. Instantly. He knelt, running his fingers over the track, dust clinging to his skin. His chest tightened. "Amara," he whispered. The savanna didn't answer, but the wind shifted. And for the first time in years, David smiled. That night, the moon rose full and white, spreading a cold silver glow over the plains. David stood in a clearing, listening. There was a sound, soft at first, like thunder muffled by distance, then closer. He turned, and from the mist came a shape, huge, graceful, familiar. The elephant stopped a few paces away. Her eyes caught the moonlight, glowing amber and alive. The scar on her ankle gleamed faintly beneath the dust. For a moment, neither moved. Then, slowly, she lifted her trunk. David's heart pounded. He stepped forward, trembling. His hand rose to his chest, the same promise he made 10 years before. Amara reached out, her trunk hovering above his heart, and there, under the moonlight, the world stopped. She remembered. From the shadows, more figures emerged, silent, towering shapes. The herd. They surrounded David in a wide circle, their breath misting in the cold air. Amara stood closest, eyes fixed on the man who had once saved him. One step forward from a matriarch, massive, tusks gleaming. She lowered her trunk, sniffed the air near David's shoulder, and rumbled deep in her chest. A sound not of threat, but of recognition. The circle broke. Amara brushed his trunk gently across David's arm before turning, away, leading the herd into the plains. No violence, no fear, just understanding. David stood frozen, his chest heaving, the tears running unchecked down his face. It wasn't a reunion. It was forgiveness. At dawn, David sat outside the ranger outpost, his uniform stained with dust and rain. His report lay unfinished. No words could explain what had happened. Some of his superiors would call it myth, others luck. But he knew better. You don't measure truth in distance or science, you feel it. When the rain began to fall, he lifted his face toward the sky. Each drop carried the scent of earth, of time, of something remembered. The same rain that once fell on the day he saved her. Weeks later, while patrolling alone, David found the old acacia tree. Its roots cracked the soil, still standing where it always had. Beneath it, pressed into the red earth, were fresh elephant tracks. He knelt, touching one. A small flower had grown within its edge. He smiled. Some promises, he thought, don't end, they simply change form. The wind stirred. Somewhere in the distance, a low rumble rolled across the savanna. Maybe thunder, maybe memory. At sunset, David walked the same dirt path that once carried Amara away. The air shimmered gold, the horizon endless. As the wind lifted dust around his feet, he paused. The light caught the particles in the air, shaping them, just for a moment, into the silhouette of an elephant. He pressed his hand against his chest and smiled. The dust faded. The light softened. But the memory stayed. Because some bonds never break. They only become part of the wind.